Hello and welcome back. Learn with me, learn psychology with me, study psychology with me. எல்லாத்துக்கும் வெல்கம் பேக். நம்ம ரொம்ப நாளைக்கு அப்புறம் வீடியோ போடுறேன். ரொம்ப சாரி. நான் என்னோடய உளம் வீடியோஸில் சொல்லியிருந்த மாதிரி பர்சனலாக ப்ரொஃபஷ்னலாக ஒரு சில ட்ரான்சிஷன்ஸ் இருக்கிறதுனால ரொம்ப லேட்டாக போடுறேன். பட் கேட் ப்ரெப் பண்ணிட்டு தான் இருக்கேன். நீங்களும் பண்ணிகிட்ருக்கீங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். நெட்டுக்கு ஐ திங்க் தேர் வாஸ் அ நோட்டிஃபிகேஷன், அதை பற்றி அப்டேட் பண்ணிங்க என்னோடய நியூஸ் லெட்டரில். இஃப் யூ ஹவ் நாட் சப்ஸ்கிரைப் டு மை நியூஸ் லெட்டர், ப்ளீஸ் சப்ஸ்கிரைப் டு த நியூஸ் லெட்டர். லிங்க் டிஸ்கிரிப்ஷனில் இருக்குது. தேங்க்யூ ஃபார் யோர் கமெண்ட்ஸ். ஒருத்தவங்க டவுட்ஸ் கேட்குறதுக்கு இது பண்ணலாம், சேனல் ஆரம்பிக்கலாம்னு சொன்னாங்க. உங்களுக்கு என்ன டவுட்ஸ்னாலும் ப்ளீஸ் நீங்கள் மெயில் பண்ணலாம். வி வில் டெஃபினெட்லி ரெஸ்பாண்ட் யுவர் மெயில். நான் பர்சனலாக டெய்லி எவ்ரிடே செக் பண்ணுறேன். நீங்கள் மெயில் பண்ணி என்கிட்ட டவுட்ஸ் கேட்கலாம். வாட்ஸ்அப் டெலகிராம் குரூப் அளவுக்கு எனக்கு இன்னும் டைம் இல்லை. ஐ எம் ஹோப்பிங் டு ஸ்டார்ட் ஒன் டு சென்ட் த கொஸ்டின் பேப்பர்ஸ், பட் இட் வில் பி அ பெய்ட் குரூப். லெட் மீ நோ யுவர் கமெண்ட்ஸ் அபவுட் இட் ஆல்சோ. பட் இட் ஒன்ட் பி டூ மச். 50 rupees, 80 rupees அந்த மாதிரி தான் பர் சப்ஸ்கிரைபர் இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன், ஹோப்ஃபுல்லி. ஸோ ஐ வில் ஒர்க் இட் அவுட் அண்ட் டூ இட் வெரி சூன் ஃபார் யூ. ஸோ த நெக்ஸ்ட் சாப்டர் நம்ம பார்க்க போகிறது லேர்னிங் ப்ராசஸஸ். ஸோ வி ஆர் கோயிங் டு லுக் அட் I think we finished memory. We are yet to do the practice questions in memory, but we will proceed with the learning processes, and then we'll come back to practice questions of learning processes and memory together, because we have many questions that are overlapping with one another. So learning processes, the first subtopic in learning process, habituation. Habituation is probably the simplest form of learning, is habituation. That is the decline in organism response to a stimulus once a stimulus has become familiar. That is like a startle. We can take an example of a startle. Sometimes we get startled when somebody touches us, right? Because it's an unfamiliar touch. But we don't get startled when people who we are used to touch us, or we understand the touch, the meaning of the touch. We don't get startled. So that is a process of habituation. Or it could also be, to give you a more lively example, there are these corporation vehicles that come to collect the garbage. They play a song every day in the morning, right? Chennai la irundinga kandipa you will know. I got very accustomed to that song right now, because that song, whenever it gets played, I used to be like really annoyed because it used to hinder my sleep. But now I'm like, okay, this is just another lullaby for me, and so I continue sleeping to it. That is a form of habituation. One other example that I can think of habituation is, I'm sure you have seen people living near to the railway station. So whenever there's a train that crosses by, we hear that noise, and sometimes the whole building vibrates, right? Like there's a shake. You can feel it on the ground, right? So, but a lot of people who've been living there for years now, they would have gotten used to that sound of a train crossing. Sometimes they even tell us, 4 a.m. there's this train that goes, 5 a.m. there's this train that goes, and they understand, they start habituating towards it. But for us, it is a very difficult thing to fall asleep with all the noises around. But this is a classic example of habituation. Another behavior that actually displays habituation is how you're orienting a response towards it. That is, for instance, if a new sight or sound is presented to a dog or a cat, it will stop its activity, like it'll drop everything and stop its activity. It'll lift its ears, if you see, and kind of tilt its head towards it and turn in the direction of the stimuli from where it is coming from, right? So if the stimuli is presented repeatedly, and there's no consequence because of it, the orienting response will start disappearing little by little, if you can see. So you would have probably seen this with your dog or cat. When you're walking on the road and you hiss, or like when you call for a dog, the first time he probably responds is very phenomenally seen in cats. The second time you meow at him, he'll probably not turn around and look at you. He'll be like, I know this guy is just calling me. And this is another important characteristic of habituation. What makes it so distinct is how it distinguishes from sensory adaptation and muscular fatigue. So that is, it has a very separate habituation for separate stimuluses that we have. We have a very specific, it's very, very specific for us to get habituated to particular stimulus. And now we are going to look at the principles of habituation. Course of habituation. What are general principles that we follow when we are getting used to something, when you're getting habituated towards something? Course of habituation. Habituation of a response occurs whenever you are repeatedly presenting it. So habit formation happens over a period of time. It doesn't happen. Rome was not built in a night. Likewise, a habit is never built over a night. It takes a lot of consistency and time, and very importantly, repetition. The decrements in responding from trial to trial are large at first, but gets progressively smaller as habituation proceeds. So you can see that the from one trial to other trial, there is the intensity of responding to a stimuli is lessened, and it literally declines after a point. And the second principle that we are going to see is effect of time. If after habituation the stimulus is probably withheld for some period of time, and the response will recover. That is, the amount of recovery is again depending on the amount of time that lapses between the two times that you're presenting. That is, after I get habituated towards something and the stimulus kind of disappears for some time, but when the stimulus comes again, reappears again, the response will recover because it's a habit. The third one is relearning effect. Habituation may disappear if you're not practicing for a long period of time, but it will proceed more rapidly in the second time you try with the stimulus. That is, in further series of stimulus presentation, habituation should occur progressively and more quicker. I can give you the example of waking up early. For instance, I very badly wanted to wake up early for the longest time in my life, and I started waking up early at one point, and after that I had a break because I was taking tablets. I wasn't able to wake up early because I was under the influence of the tablets. But after that course got over, I wanted to wake up early again. The second time I had tried, it became more swift, more easier for me to wake up. So that is the relearning effect that we are going to talk about. We just finished talking about. The fourth principle that we are going to look at is effect of the stimulus intensity. That is, we already know that if it's a reflective response is frequently stronger than a most intense stimulus, but when the response is very high, it is also very response is very intense. It is also very difficult for it to go away. Habituation proceeds more rapidly with weak stimuli, but if a stimulus is very intense, there may have been no habituation at all. So it's on either side of the spectrum, right? One thing is you can see that a reflexive response is frequently stronger. A response to something like a reflex is actually much stronger, and it is also very, very difficult to let it go. That is the intensity that determines the habituation and how it reappears and disappears. The next one is overlearning. There is a typo on the screen. It's over with a space and learning. Further learning can occur at a time when there is no longer any chance for observed behavior. That is, you can only learn more when there is no change in the observable behavior, so you get used to it. That is, this is called as below zero habituation because it occurs at a time when there is no observable response to a stimulus. There is absolutely, you can't see why it is happening, or where it is happening, you don't know, right? So that is why it's overlearned. You have kind of exceeded that limit and it's been overlearned for you. Okay, the opposite of this is stimulus generalization. That is, we've already know about this. I think in conditioning we have learned about it. Transfer of habituation from one stimulus to another, like a new but a similar stimulus, is something we call as generalization. The amount of generalization depends on the degree of similarity between the two stimuli that we are presenting. It's always the subject, not the like the one who's receiving it is the one who's going to judge how similar it is. It's not the one who is presenting it. Like for instance, in the case of you remember, I think in Ivan Pavlov's experiment, it's that they substituted the bell with a buzzer or an alarm, and the dog was able to identify it. That is because the dog kind of drew a line between the bell and the alarm and or the buzzer for that matter. It's not Ivan Pavlov who's influencing it, right? So this is stimulus generalization. How does it happen physiologically? What is the physiological mechanism of habituation? Habituation in many, it happens not in a one part of the brain, not in a single part of the brain. It happens in multiple places in the brain. It could be the cortex, cerebral cortex, from the cerebral cortex to hippocampus. People are able to identify, they were able to recall easily, that's why it's elicited as a result of habituation. So the two important areas that we need to know for habituation with respect to the brain are cerebral cortex and then the hippocampus, right? I think they are also very closely related to memory, so you can draw the parallel there, right? Please comment any kind of doubts that you have. Please ask your friends to subscribe to our channel. Please refer me to your friends, so it will be easy for me, it will be motivating for me to put more videos for you guys. And please again, reach out in case of any doubts to the email that is mentioned in the description. So habituation and emotional responses. So this is completely a theoretical basis that comes from a theory called opponent process theory. So this opponent process theory was given by Solomon and Corbett with repetitive stimulus. That is, they are giving and they see how the emotional reaction, sometimes it weakens, sometimes it strengthens. They are seeing the extremes of it. According to this theory, the onset of such a stimulus produces sudden appearance of emotional reaction, which quickly reaches the peak of intensity. Like initially you get so excited about something, right? That is what they are saying. This response and gradually declines to somewhat a lower level, and it attains what do you call this level? It's a plateau, right? It always reaches the plateau or the lower level. So the example would be when you were like a child, you were probably very excited to meet your cousins, right? In the morning, you'd be so excited to see them. So that is where this theory starts. So you gradually get used to it. You welcome them. You're so excited to have your cousins over, and then after a point, you get very used to it, right? And then the excitement kind of dies when you come towards the day after, as the day proceeds, right? So this is probably a good example for us to recollect our childhood memories as well as for the opponent process theory. So this, with the offset of the stimulus, there is a sudden switch to the emotional after reaction. That could be, in some cases, will be in an extreme opposite direction of the initial reaction. That could be like a despair, could be hatred, could be you getting angry that your cousin is using your room, right? So this is like something like an aftermath. So we call it as an after reaction. It gradually declines and the emotional state of the individual, it returns to the neutral state. Okay, I'm happy in my home. I don't want anybody sharing my room. I would rather be happy alone, right? So that's a neutral stance that we are taking. That is very usual. That's how you are, that's how your mood is usually, right? So this is how we understand the opponent process theory. Why is this called opponent process? Because first it's very exciting for you to meet your cousin, then you reach a plateau, you're coming to terms with it, and then you decline, and then goes to the extreme of you not wanting them in your room, right? Sometimes, right? Sometimes it could be the other way around also. I was always very excited to have my cousins over, actually. I don't know, I don't hold good for this theory, I think. But they further, kind of researched about it, and they found that they started dividing these processes as process A process and B process. That is, A process is a fast acting response to a stimulus that rises to the maximum and remains there as long as the stimulus is present. Like how much you never used to go to sleep when you're so excited. So it's reached its peak. That's the A process. But when the stimulus ends, the A process decays very quickly. The antagonistic B process is supposedly activated only in response to the activation of the A process, and it is supposedly more sluggish both to rise and decay. So the excitement is always high, whereas you getting contented with the feeling of you spending some time with your cousin is raising a little. It's an antagonistic feeling, meaning what? It's an opposite reaction. That is quite sluggish. So it's improving, and it's catching up with this A process a little slower than the A process, the B process I mean here, okay? I hope you all understood this. It's a little complicated for us to understand because as the name suggests, it's two opposite processes are happening. That is the A process, the B process. A process is quicker and it reaches the extreme very easily. B process is sluggish and it takes time to catch up with the A process. But only after the A process is activated, the B process gets activated, okay? Or after the A process gets to the peak and starts coming down, only the B process is activated. This theory states that with repeated exposure to stimulus, the primary emotion response exhibit a sort of a habituation. It becomes progressively smaller, while at the same time there is a marked increase in the size and duration of the after reaction. So after the first time you get really used to it, right? So like a repeated exposure, the primary emotional response, that is the A process, right? It becomes a habit for you. So the amount you're going to react becomes smaller, but at the same time there is a marked increase in the size and duration of the after reaction. What is after reaction here? You're getting back to the normal state. You're not wanting your cousin in your room, okay? I hope this didn't offend anybody and the example was clear. Now we are coming to the basics, that is the classical conditioning. Okay, now we are back reading the most probably over-read concepts in your life, that is classical conditioning, but I am going to skip all the general ones and I am going to do an in-depth understanding of it. This is going to be a huger chunk, so I might split it into two and release another video a little later into the week. But I'm not going to touch the basics. If you're going to touch the basics, you let me know. I will probably post a separate video for that. Yes. So what is classical conditioning? Some forms of learning provide more information and it's more permanent for for the but in particular provide the organism more about association, relationship among events in the world, right? Relationships come in many varieties, so the association forming starts with conditioning. One event might cause another reaction, one action might prevent another outcome. All these interwoven things are understood with the help of thanks to classical conditioning. Classical conditioning has been a milestone in the by discovering classical conditioning, which is very funny, because if you notice, most the best discoveries or the classic discoveries have not been made by psychologists but by physiologists or surgeons by accident, which is really funny because it's as if psychologists are contributing to some other field. I don't know what was happening. No offense, by the way. So classical conditioning is a process by which a naturally occurring stimulus is paired with a stimulus in the environment. As a result of it, the environmental stimulus eventually elicits the same response as the natural stimulus. So this is the classical definition that we will follow, right? So we are going to pair a natural stimulus with an environmental stimulus. As a result of the pairing and conditioning, the environmental stimulus is going to elicit the same response the natural stimulus is also eliciting here. So what is the history? You all know he was studying about the salivary glands in dogs, and then one day, while dogs obviously they naturally salivate when their tongue touches the food, but what Pavlov said was it's beyond the innate response of salivating by touching the food. They salivated when they saw him approach to feed them. So even when he was just climbing up the stairs, we were hearing the footsteps also, they were salivating. He kind of understood there is something behind this whole thing. In other words, stimuli that had previously been neutral became conditioned, and it became like a stimulus for the natural response. In this case, it could be the footsteps of Pavlov approaching or the sight of him walking in the corridor and coming to feed them. Although he is not a psychologist, in fact, this whole concept he built it around physiology only. He didn't build it towards psychology. It was a great milestone, right? But it was further popularized by John B. Watson. Watson kicked off the behaviorist movement based on Pavlov's theory, and it became such a big thing, such a hugely researched topic that we all study till date, all levels, BA, MA, MSc, MPhil, PhD, you study about Pavlov everywhere. Pavlov is inevitable in psychology, right? So You also see the study. He also, after discovering this, John B. Watson only made the classical conditioning as a very accessible thing to psychologists, since he's a psychologist, right? He was able to put it in more psychological terms than Pavlov. Pavlov designed it in very physiological, biological terms. So Pavlov's experiment requires placing a neutral stimulus immediately before the natural stimulus that automatically occurs, and which eventually leads to what? Learning of the response. You know the dog is presented with the food, and then you condition the bell with the food, and then the dog salivates at the bell. The neutral response becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the salivation becomes the conditioned response, right? So this is how the whole cycle goes. Type of stimuli and responses. So obviously you know what is an unconditioned stimulus. So the presentation of food to the dog is UCS, that is unconditioned stimulus. Presentation of the bell is the conditioned stimulus. Salivation is the unconditioned response. Salivation to the bell is the conditioned response, because it's learned to associate between the two things. Though I said I won't get into details, I've pretty much gotten into details, but if you still have doubts, please ping me. Just a quick insight into this, and then we'll probably go to the next one. So you all understood unconditional stimulus, how it becomes and how it elicits the unconditional response. So this is the whole equation of Pavlov's classical conditioning. Now we'll see the variety of conditioned responses, which is not here, but I'm just going to explain it orally. So these are the principles of I think you all would have known about all this already: acquisition, extinction. How you kind of forget about the dog, kind of forgets about it once the bell is stopped and all that, right? Spontaneous recovery, once the bell is back into habituation, the dog remembers the whole drill, right? Generalization is how I already told you, between the alarm and the bell, or the buzzer and the bell. Discrimination is the ability to differentiate between the alarm and the bell, or buzzer and the bell. Okay. I think I did a quick revision. I hope if I didn't do justice for this, please ask me the doubts in the mail, okay, or after I form the group, hopefully you can ask there also. So and also very importantly, I am planning to conduct test series on these two chapters, about which I will be speaking. I will be putting more details by the end of this video. So what are the varieties of conditioned responses? So classical conditioning has been seen in many reflexes, like for instance, if you can see, eye blinking is a classical conditioning. Knee jerk reflex is a classical conditioning, is based on classical conditioning. The conditioning preparation is called skin conductance response, that is SCR. Skin conductance response, that is also referred as electrodermal response. When you have the knee jerk response on your knee or on your elbow, that is the electrodermal, that is as in you feel like this electricity passing, right? And dermal means skin, so electrodermal response or skin conductor response is the most widely used term. And in the past it was called as what? Galvanic skin response. In this preparation, this obviously the subjects are usually human. SCR is a change in the electrical conductivity of the skin, how the electrical conductivity changes. Okay, so this is a very classic example of this is the best example for classical conditioning. That was bad, sorry. Taste aversion also. Though a lot of research has been done how people develop taste aversion, it's usually eating some food that's toxic or spoiled or like poisonous, and then you kind of learn to be very aversive towards food. If an animal eats food that makes them sick, they will then avoid eating that in the future, and they associate it with the illness. So this was first researched in the 1950s by someone called Gracia or Garcia, I forgot her name, who found that the rats who've been made ill, after they've been given saccharin, they developed an aversion towards it. Being able to quickly develop taste aversion increases the chance of an animal surviving, reproducing, passing. So survival of the fittest, again we are coming back to that. I can give you the example of I usually don't like eating beans in buffets, like these beans that are watery and stuff. So I really don't like beans in general that are like prepared like how they serve in the buffet in these hotels, right? Or like in weddings for that matter. I hate them so much, because once I think I had it and I had a very, very upset tummy. So I felt sick. I had high fever and all that. So I always associate that with very high fever. Even steam inhaling. I once steam inhaled and I had like terrible fever. So I'm very aversive to steam inhaling. I don't even let the beauticians do it when I'm doing my facials and stuff. So I associate the steam to the fever that I suffered. So I'm not encouraging anybody to do steam to me when I'm, even when I'm sick, I have a blocked nose, I don't do steam because I'm so scared about getting that fever back. I know it's a very bad pattern, but I'm glad it worked out as a good example. Pavlov was the first one to introduce the theory of classical conditioning that is now called as the stimulus substitution theory. On a behavioral level, it really, it really explains human behavior. It predicts the changes that supposedly taken place, and you can see the observable event that is happening in front of you between the observable relationship between the stimulus and the responses, right? Though repeated, if you pair it, the CS and the US, the CS becomes a substitute for the US. So that is why you see the US becomes the CS. That's why it's called now stimulus substitution theory rather than conditioning theory. It was a new name that they've given basically. What are the problems with the theory basically? The theory has several problems. So first is the CR is almost or never an exact replication of the UR. That is, the unconditional response and the conditioned response are never alike, almost never. Second, not all parts of UR of stimulus become the part of the CR. Conversely, the CR might include some responses that are not a part of UR. That is, like something that is not substitutable to each other. CR is never similar to UR. Maybe there's more to the UR. When the dog is looking at the food, it might pant and salivate. But when the dog is looking at hearing only the sound of the bell, it just salivates, right? So that panting is not a part of the CR here. Or it could be the other way around. When the CR is heard, it's very excited, so he's panting and he's salivating. It could not be the case with the UR because he knows there's already food in this guy's hand, right? So how can it be fixed? How can it be amended? So there's this guy called Hilgard. It again happened in the 1930s. So 1940s or 50s rather. He said we can make a little tweak for these things and we can probably make it better basically. First of all, he said it should be acknowledged that some components are transferred to CR. Not all, just some, not everything. Like there are 5 components and there are only 3 components here. It's okay. You are losing out 2 components here and you should be able to acknowledge it that way. Some components of the UR may depend on the physical characteristics of the US that they will not be transferred to a CS with a very different physical characteristics. Okay, so it might also depend on the physical characteristics of the unconditioned response. Okay, so a different theory altogether is what we call as the sign tracking theory that was proposed by Costa and someone, I forgot the name. It emphasizes that the aspect of animal response to CS, that is, since the association is between a stimulus and a response, it's sometimes called SR association, right? We already knew it. On the other hand, the connection between the CS and the response center might be less direct, right? Perhaps an association between the CS center and the US center is formed during the conditioning. Later, when the CS is presented, the CS center is activated, which activates the US center because of the association, which in turn activates the response center. That is through innate association. This hypothesis constitutes the position that SS association is formed during classical conditioning. Pavlov tended to favor the SS position, that is the stimulus and stimulus position. But he had very, very limited empirical support for the SS conditioning. Later, many experimenters some clever techniques to distinguish between these two alternatives. So the stimulus gets, so I'll repeat it once again, it's a little more complicated. I'll repeat it slowly. So the association is between a stimulus and a response. So we call it as a SR association. On the other hand, the connection between the CS and the response center might be less direct. Okay. So when the CS is presented, the CS center is activated, which activates the US center because they are connected to each other, which in turn activates the response center. So that SS connection is formed during the classical conditioning rather than the S and R connection. We understood? Stimulus connect ஆயிருக்கு. Stimulus response connection விட stimulus connection heavy இருக்கு, intense இருக்கு, and it's proven also. Okay மக்களே, I think I'm done with almost half of the chapter. I think 40%, 45% I'm done with the chapter. I will be releasing the next video in a couple of days. Hopefully I'll be able to record it tomorrow and edit it like in a day and release it in a day, hopefully, fingers crossed. In the meanwhile, please subscribe to our channel, like I said, and mail us for doubts. And you can also book therapy sessions with me from the website mentioned there, or you can also mail us for therapy sessions. That's also most welcome. I told you I'll be talking about the test series, right? So the test series will be conducted to paid subscribers, so you can do it through the Telegram link that I will be sending the group. That will require to pay. I will be releasing sample papers on the group with answers, with correct answers, not just answers. Has been verified by more than one person than me, by an expert also. So I have a lot of classmates who are preparing for GATE and NET and JRF, SRF. So I have also checked the answers with them and made sure it's the right answer. And obviously my professors also helped me out in this. So I hope this is useful. Please comment about what more I can do to make it more useful to you, much more personalized to you. I also have one-on-one sessions coming up in a few days, so stay tuned. Thank you.